Welcome to the Change Loves Company podcast, where I sit down with the creatives, fundraisers, social entrepreneurs, artists and activists, all with one thing in common. They're changing the world for the better through their work. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land I'm recording on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Always was, always will be. Maz Ahadiwand is a certified fundraising executive and wellness practitioner. She has more than 15 years' experience working across the fundraising landscape in Australia and the UK. She's the founder of The Full Dot, a consultancy that blends responsible fundraising practice with holistic approaches to leadership and well-being. Her work centres on creating fundraising cultures that balance compliance, ethics and donor trust with the well-being of staff and long-term relational impact. An advocate for responsible fundraising, Maz supports organisations to navigate rising donor expectations, regulatory demands and internal pressures without losing sight of values or mission. She also draws on her training in holistic coaching, psychological well-being, yoga and meditation to help fundraisers and leaders sustain their energy and reconnect with purpose in their work. When Maz joined me in the studio, we talked about what responsible fundraising actually is and why it's an important part of the approach not-for-profits should be taking when it comes to engaging with all kinds of stakeholders, not just donors. Maz Ahadiwand, thank you so much for joining us on Change Loves Company. It's great to welcome you to the studio.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Maz, you have had a little break from charity world and come back sort of in full force. Tell me a little bit about what caused the break, I guess, and why you've come back to it.
Yeah, how I got here. Yeah. Well, I've been in fundraising in the sector for 15 years and I love fundraising. I love fundraising and philanthropy. It's everything that lights me up. I think that it's such an honour to work and use skills to be able to enhance missions and make the world a better place. The thing I think I've always love about fundraising the most and what's kept me in the sector for so long is this privilege that we have to be able to give people the opportunity to experience the joy of giving. I just think it's the most beautiful thing to be able to do. And I think it's one of the best careers that you can really have. So I have been really dedicated my whole professional life to fundraising. And then in 2023, I had a baby and I took some time off. And then when I came back to the sector, things were very different. It felt like things were very different to me. And I was obviously different, so I was looking at it from a different perspective, but the sector definitely had shifted. And that aspect of donor love and all the things that I really loved about helping to teach people that joy of giving felt like it was a little bit less of a priority than it had been when I had left the sector or had gone on maternity leave. Anyway, I shortly after got made redundant and that just cracked me open like a little egg and all my yolk was streaming out. And I didn't think I'd actually go back to fundraising or back to the sector. And I found myself doing yoga teacher training, not with the intent to be a yoga teacher. I'm not really sure what my intent was, but ended up there and learning about yogic philosophy and yoga, like these really old scriptures and the wisdom within it just made me view everything very differently. It was like the connective tissue to everything I had ever learned. And when I looked at fundraising through that lens, I felt like there was something I was really missing from before and I could see it really differently. And that's how the concept of responsible fundraising came about. And I ended up developing the responsible fundraising framework. And it wasn't something I intentionally thought about doing. It was more of a organic birthing from that journey. And that's where I am now.
Amazing. It's so interesting when you step away from something and come back to it, how your perspective can shift, as you say. You'd had an experience and possibly changed a bit yourself. And I think too, when you have children, perhaps you start to just think about the future in a different way, whether that's your own work future or the future of the planet and things like that.
Yes.
And I guess charities inherently are doing good, but they don't always do the good that well, let's face it. So tell me a little bit more about responsible fundraising. What do you mean by that?
That's exactly it. You kind of knocked the nail on the head. It's the sector has the intent, and there's responsible fundraising going on all the time. You know, we're doing it really well, and we care so much, and there's so much intent to do good in all of our practices. But it's hard. Like, fundraising is really hard, and there's evolving technologies, and there's additional pressures, and we're always under cost pressures, and we're not set up, I think, to always thrive to do good. So the framework really was around how do we enable, or how could we could develop something to enable us to do good easier, so that we could do that consistently and more sustainably. And responsible fundraising really is the conscious practice of fundraising in an ethical, sustainable and accountable way that uplifts all people involved in it. So the fundraisers, the beneficiaries, the donors, whilst enhancing the mission. So it's what's happening at the moment anyway. It's just the framework allows us to plug the gaps, and in operational issues, so that we can operate in a responsible fundraising way ongoing, and in all that we do.
So I know that you've just sort of started out with this, and you're dipping your toe in the water, as it were, and learning as you go. What are some of the key areas that charities should be looking at if they were to, say, undertake this this program of work, to kind of go, okay, we want to get to a point where all aspects of our operation and fundraising is in fact responsible?
Well, look, it can work on a really macro or a micro, in micro way. How I can see it really helping is it's not something that's going to replace what's already happening. It just helps join the dots of things that are happening and plug the gaps of things that aren't happening. So, for example, if an organisation was thinking about starting a new campaign, or moving into doing a new digital campaign, or starting face-to-face fundraising, then looking at it through this lens could really help them ensure that the full holistic view and impact of that campaign was done in a responsible fundraising manner. So it would look at the leadership and transparency. It would look at, does this campaign or this program align with our goals? How are we measuring it? Do we have multidimensional measurements of success, not just campaign performance? Have we looked at it from a financial perspective to ensure that it's sustainable and it is a good investment from a long-term perspective? It looks at it from staff capacity and capability. Are we going to put pressure on our staff for doing this? Do they have the skills to know how to do it? And then it looks at it from a compliance and integrity perspective. So something like face-to-face has its own unique compliance, so bringing that all together, that makes it easier to be compliant, but then going above and beyond, actually what's the more ethical thing to do, and looking at some of those scenarios and the frameworks of how a fundraiser would make some of those decisions, so that it aligns back to the values of the organisation. And then the constituency and care of the people that we are bringing on the journey, and any case studies we're using in the stories that we're telling. So are we telling stories that are in the most truthful way? Are we using tactics that are empowering our donors and really doing and leading into that teaching of the joy of giving, rather than guilting or bombarding? So it looks at all of those aspects and brings it together to ensure that the full end-to-end impact of that program has been considered through a responsible fundraising lens.
Amazing. I mean, I find I've worked in the space for about 22 years now, and still so many organizations do things in a very ad hoc way. As you say, they kind of respond to outside forces, and without necessarily planning or strategizing, or, as you say, looking around at what capacity is in the organization. Yeah. They start to try new stuff. And I think there is a pressure there, isn't there, to be innovative. And particularly if one program isn't working so well anymore, let's add something else. This sounds like it's a way to kind of stop, just take a beat. Yes. And look at things in a very holistic way before proceeding with the shiny new thing, or, setting something up.
Yes, it's exactly that. And we all understand why those pressures are there. This is exactly that. It's a conscious breath to be able to look at and really think about the long-term impact of what we're doing, but in a way that's not causing more issues or work to do it, but hopefully easier to do it because it's bringing everything together through one framework rather than someone being involved in the compliance, but someone also not being involved in all the way down to like how we're thanking and our gifts and everything like that, that everything is pulled in together under one framework and that everyone's on the same journey to understanding what responsible fundraising is and practicing that as an ongoing practice rather than something we implement and then it's done.
Yep, there's a report in someone's drawer or a file online somewhere that no one ever looks at again. When we were talking about this to prepare for the interview, you mentioned that there's a little bit of a reluctance to bring in the yoga side of things for fear that maybe you're seen as a little tiny bit happy-clappy or whatever it might be, a little bit airy-fairy. But tell me a little bit more about that yoga practice and what you've drawn specifically from that.
Yeah, and it is a big component of it. It's how I got here. It's not the only component. I was very inspired and influenced by the work of Adrian Sargent and Jen Shan at the Institute of Sustainable Fundraising with the work they do on philanthropic psychology, the work of the Conscious Leadership Group and the work that Bambooda's doing in responsible leadership. So there's lots of other inspirations for it that have a lot of scientific back and have a lot of research behind some of their principles that have fed into this. So it's not reinventing the wheel. But yoga played a really key role in looking at how I was even approaching responsible fundraising. And some of the key aspects, I guess, are the yamas and niyamas, these moral guidelines in the Yoga Sutra, and especially ahimsa, which is non-harming. And we don't really think about, and we have no intention to harm, of course we don't in the sector, but when we are sending or not honouring preferences or not having the processes to ensure that our data is clean or, those small things, it's not about that lack of intent. It's that when there is gaps, we do cause harm, and ongoing practices of that does cause harm, and collective impact of lots of organizations doing that causes harm to us as a sector and the donors. So it was really looking at how could we operate from a place where we weren't causing any harm at all and really taking in, and some of the other yamas and niyamas fed into this, and operate from a vibration that wasn't fear or guilting.
Panic.
Yeah.
A lot of panic in the sector.
And scarcity, which of course we're going to have because it's never enough for most causes. But coming from a place of moving that so that we really were designing fundraising vehicles that allowed people to feel uplifted and enhance their well-being and without compromising the funds that we needed. And also for me, the big aspect of it I could talk about the yoga link for hours, whatever. I obviously don't feel we have the time. It could be a whole nother podcast. But there was an element of dharma for me, like the purpose. Like I felt like this was very organic and it came from me to all of the skills that I had and influences that I had been exposed to develop this. And now this has been birthed. Let's put it out there, and it's not something that I really hope that the sector would love to collaborate on it and enhance it so that we can make something really beautiful to the way in which we are fundraising and bring back that joy and the alignment to values for fundraisers. Because one of the measures of success of this particular framework is keeping staff longer because they feel like there's no need to have any kind of moral licensing or there's nothing that ever puts their integrity on the line. Again, not intentionally, but just through the practices of gaps in the way in which we're operating.
And I think too, in a lot of organizations, especially the larger ones, potentially different divisions of the organization are really coming at things from very different angles. So the finance team is all about let's not overspend, and the board might be let's look at some innovations, and the fundraising team is just trying to do the basics and get them right. There's a lot of that siloing or just people having very different approaches and goals and aims.
Yes.
And they're very often not particularly aligned.
Yes, yeah. And that's even more need for a framework that is that thread between all of it to bring it together so that we're all operating from the same page. And that's what I would hope it would do.
Another aspect for me is when I get a acquisition pack in the post and it's sort of full of plastic bump, or if I go to a fundraising gala dinner and I can see the waste that's there, etc., that sometimes, for, say, a cancer research charity, the environmental side is just doesn't appear to be all that important. I do kind of get that it's not a focus, but I'm wondering if the framework is also a way to kind of bring that aspect into it so that we're being responsible across the board, not just responsible in our own little niche sector of cause.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a big part of it. And I think that there's always need for things like acquisition packs, and there's loads of evidence written about, the more that you put into them, the better the response. And I think that the responsible fundraising framework won't stop the practices that we're doing where there's a lot of evidence into why we're doing some of it. Hopefully it will put and connect it with the values of the organisation if it has environmental policies around how it operates in that space, that's known to whoever is making the decisions around those packs, and that they've done their due diligence to ensure whatever those agreements and those values are upheld. So that might not be that they don't do it. It just might be that they do it with this supplier, or they do it like this, or they're evaluating it, or there's ongoing feedback loops that aren't just going into a void but coming back to make strategical change. So I think that the reason sometimes that happens and that there is a disconnect is there's just no mechanism to connect them and to so that people are ending up working in silos, making decisions that they probably don't even realize the bigger impact to how it could affect the whole organization.
Do you think it's kind of a top-down thing where boards or leadership need to really take control of this, or is it something that the fundraising team can kind of bring into the organisation? Who tends to drive these sorts of decisions?
Look, I think it has to be an element of top down, because if it's not within the strategy and the KPIs and it filters down, then it's not going to be embedded. I think that a lot of fundraisers at the moment working in the operational areas of fundraising are definitely operating in a responsible fundraising manner to the best of their ability. But one of the experiences I think I found of trying to implement things in silo or for just one particular area, it's impossible for it to sustain or to fully thrive, because it needs the larger structure and it needs everyone to be working in the same way for it to really have its impact. So I think I think it's an agreement that everyone is working in a responsible fundraising manner, but it has to come from the top as well. Yeah, it has to filter down. I think it has to be ingrained and embedded in everything that the fundraising and marketing team are doing.
And I guess just that fundamental understanding of what that means, because it's as you say, I think if you asked any fundraiser, are they fundraising responsibly, most of them would probably say absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you start to drill down, as you say, into certain aspects of it, it might be most of the time, or in certain aspects, yes, but in other aspects, definitely not.
Yes.
So I guess even trying to pull that apart and look at, build on the good stuff too, right?
Yes.
Like it's not sort of saying going in and, you need to start from the beginning. It's more like, how can we make sure that you've got the scaffolding that you need to be able to do good and do it well.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the processes are there. For example, loads of organizations will have feedback mechanisms for donors to feedback, but they might not necessarily have the structure of how that feedback makes change. That just might be their missing link to it. So it might be just building, as you said, on things that already exist, to bring it full circle so that you can have that holistic view of it and it all connects. It's the rewiring of things that are already existing. And that's what I think is so amazing about our sector, is that intent is there. It's not like you're going in and trying to teach people who aren't responsible or aren't acting in a responsible manner to be responsible. You're just how can we make this more sustainable, and how can we ensure that it's easy for you to do it rather than it being laborious? Because the sector is getting harder, I think, and there's more compliance, and especially with emerging technologies and keeping on top of that and keeping compliant on top of that and keeping ethical on top of like what does that look like? How do we do that? So the framework will be a living thing, I think, and evolve, but something's needed to be able to help guide and support. Otherwise it's exhausting. And I think we are losing lots of really good fundraisers because there is a lot of burnout, because there's a lot of pressure. It's not an easy job. And unless there's support to align that feeling of why you even got into the sector and that joy of what you're doing, why would you want to stay? It's difficult after a while.
It feels like this could become something that when you go for a job interview, you kind of look your interviewer in the eye and say, "Now, are you practicing a responsible fundraising framework?" And if they can say, "Yes, we've done the legwork," you can kind of be quite relieved and sort of go, right, I know that they've actually looked at this properly, because I speak to so many people who start a job in a charity and look around after a few weeks and go, this is not what I was told was the situation. And you wonder whether it's because actually nobody knew what the situation was, or whether they just kind of fudged it because they needed a staff member and it's like, well, she'll learn or he'll learn when they get there. So again, I feel like this could be one way of kind of vetting an organisation to kind of go, well, have you thought stuff through? Because very often, as you say, they're just kind of plugging gaps.
Yes,
particularly with staffing.
Yeah,
it's like we just need somebody in that role, and we needed them yesterday, and we'll deal with the rest of it when they start.
Yeah. I think so, because I think one of the measures of success of how it could enhance the sector is that from a fundraising perspective, it's a great way of saying, do you operate in a responsible fundraising manner? Do I want to work for this environment, for this organisation? Because everything's messier under the lid, because when you go for an interview, it's based on the intent, really. We talk about the intent of what we want to do. We're not really talking about some of the messiness underneath the lid of it. But also long-term for donors to be able to build trust of sustainability of the relationships in which we're engaging people in, if they understand that organizations are moving to a responsible fundraising framework. I mean, how much reassuring is that to know that you're spending my money in this way? And we obviously donors look for those metrics, but at the moment we look at it through cost of fundraising, which isn't the right metric to be.
How much we're spending on admin.
Yeah, and that's why we've kind of got a disillusioned view of this chief exec is being paid this much, which why would that be a bad thing? They're doing an amazing job. And so I think if we can have another measure, and maybe that measure is looking at responsible fundraising, then it gives another thing for donors to think of, like, okay, this is why I want to support this organization. This organization is invested in, no matter how much it's spending, it's doing it through a framework that's ethical and sustainable. And that's what I want to get. That's what I want to support. So I think it can help those coming into the sector as fundraisers. I think it can also help donors. Yeah. And hopefully that all enhances the mission of what we're doing.
It sort of puts me in mind of, I think it was Ken Burnett who was driving the Committee on the Donor Experience a few years ago in the UK. And I remember at the Institute of IOF, Institute of Fundraising UK, at a conference I went to, he was talking about some of the findings. And when you actually start to listen to what donors are saying, it's kind of a real eye-opener, isn't it? What are the mechanisms in this framework for that sort of donor input or donor engagement? Or how do they fit into the thing?
Well, one of the pillars, the three pillars, all interconnected: leadership and transparency, integrity and compliance, and constituency care and respect. And it's that constituency care and respect pillar that that donor aspect fits in. And not just donors, it's volunteers and anyone who has, or advocates, anyone who has that exchange or energy exchange, whether it be financial or not, with the organization. And it's building in feedback mechanisms that don't just go into a void. It's building them in and knowing how to be able to use that feedback to be able to make change where's needed, and having those multidimensional measures of success. So we are looking at things that aren't just financial or performance in campaigns, but looking at things like donor satisfaction, if that might be what it is, or commitment, or other metrics that look at how are they actually feeling. And I guess at the end of the day, attrition, like are we keeping them for a long time? So it builds in multi-dimensional metrics of success and feedback. And I think those are just really important parts of how it enhances what we're actually doing. So that we're not looking at, this campaign was a huge success, we got this many people in, but actually we have no idea how they feel. We have no idea whether we're going to be able to keep them, because that isn't obviously a sustainable way to practice fundraising.
Yeah, again, I speak to a lot of people who say, I'll be like, how many regular givers do you have? And they're like, oh yeah, we've got, a couple of thousand, and we did a big push a few years ago, and it did really well. We haven't really done anything with them since then. And you just sort of think, oh my goodness, such a wasted opportunity, because it's, as we know, so much harder and more expensive to get a new donor, whether they're RG or cash or whatever, versus, keeping someone happy.
Yeah.
And again, it's often those missing pieces where people the activity is sort of there for the activity's sake, but very few people able to think longer term. And perhaps, take responsibility, not to, no pun intended, but I think partly because of the churn in the sector as well.
Yeah.
It's very rare that anyone sticks it out long enough to see things through to fruition. Of course, there are many, notable exceptions to that. And you do tend to find that the organizations where the team is relatively stable, the leadership is stable, and, people feel like they're in it for the long haul, not necessarily staying there for decades just because, and not, being open to change, et cetera. But, people just come and go, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. You can't achieve anything in that time, and you can't take responsibility for anything because you're not there to see the impact of your decisions.
Yeah. I think that's definitely one of the issues. I think also charities are just trying to work on more of a shoestring. So it's just harder to have, there are corners that are cut not for the lack of intent of wanting the outcome, but because they might not be able to invest in that particular role that really looks at insights or has the skill or capacity to look at donor insights. Or I think it's just hard to do it when you're constantly under the pressure of increased donor expectations and cost, constantly scrutinized for cost. And when you're looking at planning on financial years rather than long term, and it's just really difficult, isn't it? So this hopefully will be a support to removing some of those barriers and operating in a way that helps us, because it is extraordinarily difficult to be on top of everything. And I don't think any of the gaps that this framework plugs, organizations wouldn't know. It's not like they go like, oh, that's a shock, I've never even considered doing that. I think it's that they're probably all tried, and there's probably lots of failed attempts at why it's not worked. But that's why I think hopefully this view of it all being interconnected that could make it easier will support the sector, because it definitely isn't, as I said, for lack of intent. I think I've mentioned that quite a few times.
Yeah, that's fine.
Intent, yeah. But that's a good thing. That's a really good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably comes back to what you were saying at the beginning around those connections and collaborations and making sure that you are looking at all aspects of what you're doing and for the long term, and putting things in place that you're then going to stick with as well. And I think that's also sometimes a bit of an issue where people, they do go through the planning stage and the strategic stage, and then they just get a bit bored, or they don't necessarily see a quick return. So they're like, well, that didn't work.
Yes.
So we're just going to go on to the next thing. So I think that will be the next challenge for people to actually kind of, take these things on board and then actually sit with them for long enough to sort of see the impact.
Yeah. And one of the most important things I think for us to be able to do that is that there's measures and monitoring to ensure that we're seeing some kind of success, some kind of feedback. It can't be so long that we're just trusting that it's the right thing to do. We need to be able to define, okay, if donor retention is one of those metrics, how are we measuring that and on what ongoing basis, and how are we reviewing this is the right thing? And I think once we start seeing some of the fruits from this way of working, then we can trust that the long-term vision and project what the long-term vision is. But it's definitely got to be monitored and measured. Otherwise, we can't kind of jump into thinking, okay, we're gonna just move to this. But when I say move to this, it's not redefining anything that's not there. It's just helping to bring it together.
I think too, it comes back to your comment around we are enabling supporters to feel good about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there can be a reluctance, maybe not, hopefully not in the fundraising team, but certainly a sort of board level or CEO level of people who are not really involved in fundraising or don't have that background of thinking that it's a little bit of a, we know we need it, but we're not really very happy about it kind of thing. And I think if we can bring it back every time to, people want to help, they're often incredibly passionate about the cause, more so very often than the fundraiser, because they've lived it or they've experienced something to do with it, or they've lost a loved one to some particular disease. They want to do something. And I think it's the same when you ask people to share their story for an appeal.
Yes.
Usually if they say yes, they are all in. Like they are absolutely willing to spill their guts. And I think we kind of forget sometimes that it's like we think, well, we know how this all works, but other people really don't. And it's like, actually, I love making a donation. I wish I had billions to just randomly give to all the causes that I love. And so every time I make a donation, it reminds me that, this is actually kind of a fun thing to do. And obviously you do need to do it respectfully and responsibly, so that you're not guilting people into it or not only asking and never thanking and never making them understand, the impact and knowing where their money's gone. But as you say, it's kind of a privilege to be able to give people that opportunity. 100%. And that's fundamentally what we're doing.
Yeah, it is. It's a real, real privilege, and how beautiful. And I think what our world needs the most, like to remind us of this service, this act of service that we can do. It takes us away from our ego. It connects us to our oneness of being all together. So it is. And a lot of people just don't know what that feels like, because they haven't had the opportunity to experience what that feels like in a way that enhances their well-being. And that's what I love about a lot of what the Institute of Sustainable Fundraising are doing with that philanthropic psychology is looking at, why can't we have fundraising practice that makes people feel good? Why does it have to, that it enriches people, doesn't deplete them? Like, why does it need to make them feel guilty? And obviously there's need sometimes for some tactics, and there's it's not like a blanket rule, but in general, these are beautiful experiences that we get to design and craft for people to take them on their spiritual journey of connecting to something bigger than them. And that's why I love Gifts and Wills. I think in the Gifts and Wills space they do that really well. We just don't do that in the single kind of giving space, I don't think, as well, because it's more transactional. And I think with $5 it's difficult of how much an organization spends on that journey, and and what they do next with them, and how committed that donor is. And there's a room for improvement, I think, about making that journey better, because it is the most beautiful thing to be able to be part of, to help people connect to that.
And it doesn't have to be too fancy or whiz-bang or expensive, whatever. I often say to people, try and make a donation to your own organisation and see what happens. Is the form easy to use? Do you get a thank you? What does it look like? Do you hear anything else from them? From a sort of logistical point of view, how easy is it to actually make a donation? You'd be surprised sometimes. Small organizations, it's so hard to make a donation. And other times it's like you make it and then you just hear nothing. And it's like, it's not that hard to just send a little message, an email, text, whatever it might be. But you're right, it does come back to, where are we going to put our resources? Where are we going to put our energies and our focus? And it can be really tough to make those decisions.
Yeah, because it seems simple, right? Like, just thank them. But if you've got, a certain amount of resource and only a certain amount of time. And to thank them, you've got to have your clean data, and your data's got to have all the right details, and you've got to have a process, and someone's got to written that comms, and someone's got to have the ability to be able to send it or have it automated, and therefore you need some technology to have it automated, so you have the skill set. So is it that easy? It's like, it's not that easy once you really think about it. And if they're looking at, there's pressures of how do we keep expenditure low and keep getting more money and growing, those things kind of fall to the side because we're trying to do so many different things. So what seems easy and logical, I think sometimes gets pushed to the bottom of the priority list over increased acquisition or looking at next shiny things. And sometimes our conferences can be a bit like that. We like to showcase the new, and then we get excited about that, and then we haven't sorted out the salutations or on the data or anything like that. And it's difficult.
I sometimes think it's relatively easy for a very large organization with lots of money and experience, and they can outsource and they can do, not that they get it right every time, but at least they have the resources. And actually sometimes for a very tiny charity, it can be not easy exactly, but if you've only got 100 people on your database, you can call every single one of them. You can have coffee with every single one and, get the most out of them and build a community. It's the ones in the middle who have tiny teams starting to have a quite big database, lots going on. That's where I think sometimes things fall through the cracks because it's like, where do we start? Yeah. There's so much we should be doing. We know we need a bequest program. We know we need a mid-value program, but and it's it's tricky.
Or growing teams that are growing at a fast capacity of keeping an infrastructure of responsible fundraising in it. You have new staff coming in, so how do you ensure you've got a new program set up? How do you ensure that training is in line with everything? But I think you're right. I mean, money makes everything easier. If you had loads of money, then we'd be able to do like the most fabulous jobs ever. Like, what would be the problem? But could you imagine the kickback from that of us spending so much money on making everyone? But you had such a lovely journey, didn't you? We spent all the money, but don't you feel good? So I think that there's. Yeah, you're right. It's that kind of in between of how can we scale what we're doing without spending loads of money that doesn't compromise on integrity and service,
and without just doing it for the sake of it.
Yeah,
getting bigger for the sake of it.
Yeah,
it's like what are we actually? Who are we serving here? And what do we actually need to make to do the good in the world?
Yeah, look at the impact.
So just to finish up, Maz, where to next with the responsible fundraising framework? You said you're sort of trialling it with a particular organisation.
Yeah, we're working with one organisation that is the attitudinal is responsible fundraising through and through on certain projects and programs. But really, I'd love to get more collaboration around people who would be interested in collaborating on it to enhance it, make it better, road test it, see and have their input into it. There's so many amazing thought leaders that could contribute to this to it, I think. So if anyone is interested in doing that, I'd really gladly open that up. And then I would love to test it or pilot it with some organizations looking at the full sort of marketing and fundraising team overall and looking at how well it could be implemented and where are the areas for improvement. I think there's so much value in it, but it's definitely a collaborative, and I hope that it's something that the sector can own rather than it being driven just by me, because all of my experience and expertise have got it to here. But if we're going to make it really work, it has to have input from a lot of other clever cookies. So that's the next step for it, really.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing what happens next. Maz, thank you so much for joining Change Loves Company in the studio today. It's been lovely having you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure.